You don't know what ghetto style means right now.
I haven't even started the episode yet. So
You still haven't started yet?
no, here we go. Now we're going to start the episode. This is
Okay.
the official beginning of the episode.
Now I can tease it.
Can you feel the difference?
It feels
the
more
massive
official.
difference.
Yeah.
The red
feels
light
better.
in the booth just turned on. It's on air. It's flashing. Actually, it doesn't flash. Just
That'd be distracting.
it doesn't flash. It stays.
You want it
just
to
stands
stay on because then you could think that you're going on and off the air.
Yeah, actually, I've been in a studio where it was flashing, and that was a signal to me. It was going very wrong. But
Yeah.
anyway, this is Three Brothers Talking / Two Brothers Talking, book club edition. I am David.
I am Jeremy.
You were ready to go with that. I didn't think if, or I thought maybe you wouldn't be ready to go because you're so used to waiting for Andrew to chime in. But presence of mind by you.
You know, I am pretty good at knowing my surroundings and living on my toes now with 2 kids.
Always being able to hear out of the back of your,
There's always someone crying, man. There's always someone.
out of the corner of your ear, so to speak. You
Yep.
can always hear what's going on. You're always present.
Exactly.
Yeah, you got 2 kids. How long have you had 2 kids now? Like
Maddie
7
is
months?
A little over 7 months.
Okay,
So yeah, about 7 months. A little bit over that.
gotcha. You guys are doing well.
We are filling our quiver with
filling
arrows.
the quiver. That's right.
I'm all
Okay.
about this. I'm gonna have a high. I'm talking to Faith. We were joking about having high capacity quivers, which might need to be regulated at some point.
High capacity quiver. That's good.
Psalm 127, man. High capacity.
The high capacity quiver.
Because
Yes,
it
that's
only
the goal.
holds 10. It can only hold 10 rounds.
I tell you what, I mean, I don't know how, but if God chose to give me more than 10 kids, I can't
Oh,
imagine.
man. I was listening to someone the other day and like 11. And I'm like, dude, wow.
Well,
That's just a long time. Think about that's a long time for your wife to be pregnant. And then
Yeah.
recovering and then pregnant again. Just
Yeah.
mathematically.
well, so doesn't Vody Bauckham have how many kids does he have? Doesn't he have 12?
Well, he
Something like
does.
that.
They've adopted a lot of them.
Yeah.
So, not saying we're very pro adoption on this podcast.
We
So-
are very pro adoption. That's true.
That wasn't saying anything other than the fact of his wife was not pregnant for all those adoptions or
Yeah.
kids.
Boy, we're all over. Neither of us can talk. We're coming at you at
Might need
the
to
end of
restart.
a long workday for both of us, I think, right?
Yes, it has. But I've been I had meetings today from basically about 7:30 till 4:30 in the afternoon, and basically then at the end of the day, I was prepping for getting stuff ready. It's awful.
Yeah, I don't
Meetings.
want to, since we have connections to your employer, and also my employer might listen to this. We won't get into graphic detail about meetings, but I'm not a meeting person.
Nah.
Are you?
No, we have a Thursdays basically allocated meetings basically all on one project with all our
You
team
just
and everything. So
put 'em on
Thursdays
one day.
all right, we're gonna work on this project all day. Get stuff ready for meetings on and off with internal, external teams, and we had meetings this week where I thought were teams meetings, and they were evidently on site meetings, and that's very we're not getting to Lewis Center right now, and we're not going to make it because it's 35 minutes away or 40 minutes away.
Yeah. Lewis Center, the Hollywood of mid-central northern Ohio. That's what they call it.
That's exactly what how'd you know? You heard that too?
The apple of Ohio.
The big apple city.
Yeah. But we're both coming at the end of a long workday. Plus, Jeremy's got more work ahead of him because they're sleep training.
Yeah, it's going better though. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know how much detail you go into, but it's been easier than our other child. So that's
You can go
good.
into some detail. I mean, you don't need to go into more detail.
Well,
but
Micah was much more difficult. There were times Micah would be up literally the entire night and wake up a little bit and have a raspy voice, and that made us feel awful. But
he actually wore himself out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But Maddie has not had that problem. She usually wakes up once And it's usually like a prolonged once and maybe like one other time, but it's been rare.
Yeah.
So it's just been good.
Maddie,
it's just me falling back to sleep's been the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jeremy's in the middle of that. And my wife and I we're like six months into pregnancy now.
Are we pregnant or is she pregnant?
We collectively are 6 months into pregnancy, but she is the one that is pregnant.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, but like as a stage of life, we're both in it.
You're both in that for the
stage
long haul.
of marriage. Yeah, it's starting to get more real, I guess. And
it's real.
Getting the house is really starting to transform.
You're doing it at home, right? Home birth?
No, that's not in the plans.
Mm-hmm.
That's for people with high capacity quivers, you know?
Well, I see the thing is we figure like we just learn how to do it ourselves and then we can like cut the doctor out of the equation.
DIY. That's what you're going for.
No, I'm not really doing that. If my wife is listening, she's gonna get me because I'm like, I am not catching. Like that's not gonna happen. If I'm down there's like a major emergency.
Things have gone wrong.
Have you guys gotten everything painted yet?
We've got actually last weekend painted like 3 rooms in our house. The nursery.
The baby gets 3 rooms. Oh,
well, no. But so my office, I had previously, if you look back at old episodes of our podcast, you'll hear us talking about my old office, which was my office until the baby came along. Then it was like, your office should be downstairs, in the basement because lots of reasons. So in the dungeon. So that just meant there was a new room to paint. But now, baby's room is painted and it's time to, now it's time to just buy and build things, right? Like we're at the portion of the room makeover where the only job is pick things out online, ship them to our house, assemble them. And then the final stage is like, find pictures to hang on the wall and things like that. That's all my wife's department.
That's
yeah.
Well, you've done the registry. Yeah, she registered at Target. Because I think like Target, if Faithful, I'm sure it's already told your wife. If you like add stuff to your Target registry and people don't buy it, you can keep adding it to like a year after the pregnancy and just go in and buy it like the next day and still get the percentage off.
That is not
pretty
bad.
Great.
Yeah. That's why people come to this podcast, is to hear Target tips.
Target tips. I don't have very many. My Target tip is just let your wife do it.
That's true.
I've done better at that area, I think. I guess you have to ask her.
Picking out decor?
No, I don't pick out the decor. I just supply the funds to pick out the decor or whatever.
Gotcha.
My job is to make sure there's a balance in the account that's black and not red.
Yes, I'm in the bookkeeping side, and then I'm on the execution side, and she's in the.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. So that's where Rachel and I are at, and then work and everything has been work plus the church has been just full court press for a little while now.
Not even halfway. Doing zone or man to man.
It's man to man.
Oh.
Because it's even, zone is a little more chill, but, man to man. And, we're coming to the end of that season. The end of that is in view, which we're looking forward to. God was really gracious to sort of line up relief, especially in the work world, right when the baby is going to come, which is awesome.
I mean, the baby could come late, like a month late.
Baby could come a month late, and then we just have more time. We just have more time to prepare.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So that means that Jeremy and I are going to dust off the book, Heaven Misplaced.
So no joke, I've reread this chapter about 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. We've had a couple
been
false
ready to
starts.
do this, and then we just kind of like didn't do it.
So full disclosure on my part, I haven't reread it 3 or 4 times. So that means that Jeremy's read the content a lot.
Yeah.
And I read it once and even put out an outline with some show
you're pretty
prep.
prepared.
But it's been a while and didn't have time to reread it. So that means that we're going to have an interesting mix of preparation on this. But anyway, chapters 4 and 5, just to refresh for everybody. Heaven Misplaced is a book by Douglas J. Wilson. I don't know his middle name, but
J sounds good.
it sounds right. It sounds classy. Douglas J. Wilson. Anyway,
Dougie Dubs.
it's a book about eschatology, specifically post-mill eschatology. It's sort of a primer on what a biblical view of the time between Christ's ascension and his second coming. It's his argument, a simple argument for an optimism there instead of a pessimism, and it's his argument for sort of a post-mill structure. If you don't know what those words mean, we talked about them a little bit whenever we went through chapter 1 of this book. But there's obviously lots of really more in-depth resources that you can look into for that. Now, fast forward, not that far though, because we're on chapter 4 and 5, and so we're talking about tonight. And we've also just haven't been podcasting a lot recently, so we might be rusty. But Jeremy's got sleep training tonight, which means that we're not going to take too long. And we're already
that means I should be able to stay awake longer.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that means we're already I think 10 minutes in or so here. So we got to, I think we get rolling on it, you know?
Yeah, we're 13 minutes in, but I don't know how much of that we are or are not using.
Yeah, that's true. So, Jeremy, right before we got on, you were talking about buying land, building something for the next generation. And before we get into these chapters specifically, just go ahead and kick around the idea, because I cut you off and said save it a little bit.
I didn't think we were going to. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think so far some things that pretty much.
Why does this make you think in those ways?
So over a long haul, David and I have come out of, I don't know, I'd say more of the, growing up as more of the evangelifish. You have your dispensationals, really all you know, because that's all you really have been taught from churches or haven't been taught. That's all you really know. Or even
sort of a left behind-ish framework for
not things. Really a framework at all. It's more like I've read sort of enough to kind of, and you're not really thinking through how they all fit together or how books are written, especially different literature.
I've read enough to be dangerous.
Yes. Enough to be uninformed.
That's right.
And from that, you get so much more of a pessimistic view of what's going to happen here now. So you're like, okay, on this point of what's the point of building or legacy? Basically, the only thing you come down to legacy then is, well, I just need to have enough for my next generation, for retirement, and then maybe a little bit for after I go and stuff. That's all you're doing. But I think more so than everything, moving to more of the all-mill and even reading the post-mill and thinking through all this stuff is more of the optimistic viewpoint, which especially listening to other people who've gone to that eschatology, they're like, well, it's more optimistic, especially for men. You need that optimism. It helps drive you to build change. Rather, like, the world is not gone. Politics and all stuff, like, God is still reigning over this. So we can build more, not just for our generation or our kids' generation or our grandkids' generation, but 3 or 4 generations out. Or just thinking through that. You're at least thinking whether it's going to be that way, not still learning a lot of stuff, still working through it. But you had the ideas and sitting there saying, like, at least there's optimism, sit there and say, I want to build something that either like someone else needs to add on to this. Like there's I was listening to a podcast. They're discussing how there is, I don't know where it's located, but there's a cathedral where it got built over 400 years, and it was built just by the town. So that the kids and their family, like they would go to work, then they'd go after work, they'd go build on the cathedral. So it's kind of a hodgepodge, but they had the view of like, we are building something that's going to last forever, and we're all going to have a share in this. Like, just like that. That's something more so with getting land or whatever, like a place where we call home, where our kids and families and friends can call home. And if there's ever anything going on, we have a nest, I guess.
There's something that, this isn't to say that like, if you're not post-mill, you just never leave a legacy, or you never leave a lasting impact, or you have no interest in doing that, because neither Jeremy or I would just say squarely we're post-millennial people. Right. We would say definitively we are all millennial people. definitively 100%.
Yeah.
And the post-mill thing is something that has certain pieces of it that we think are beneficial, and then there's other pieces of it that, you know, we have some more questions about, which is why we're reading the book.
Yeah. Well, and also going back to, I think you were more optimistic than I ever was as far as Sawmill, and I was more of a pessimistic, but I moved more toward optimism and also the sense of urgency to be praying and being more optimistic. Yeah. And also, I know countless people who are of the disposition who have believe great legacies and have left great legacy personally and throughout church history. So like that's also not to say that's not what I meant by that if that came out that way.
Yes. Yeah. I just think that's something that I want to be sensitive to that, because whenever we talk about like a perspective, it's easy for people to jump to the caricature that they think you're painting of them.
Right. And we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
That wasn't my intent.
Yeah. And I'm definitely optimistic by measure of self-defense, because I am a very pessimistic person. I'm a very doom and gloom person.
Likewise.
And so I kind of need to buoy myself to a positive thing, sometimes by way of like just causing to not be hopeless about things. But so what we mean by, and I would agree with what you said there, that this viewpoint maybe gives a different encouragement to leaving a legacy, is not that if you don't believe post-mill or if you are dispensational, you have no, just give it up. You don't believe there's any reason to care about anything on earth. That's not the truth. But there is a certain motivation that comes from a belief that is either an all-mill or a post-millennial thing, which is a belief that, one, if you work hard and God gains ground, it's not just going to be lost in the end. Mm-hmm. By necessity, a pre-mill or dispensational viewpoint sort of believes that any ground that is gained is sort of lost.
Yeah, or no ground before. At least in this world, there's only ground ultimately lost until the second coming. Like that's basically the only real optimism is that point.
Yeah. So these covenantal sort of perspectives, and these sort of optimistic sort of perspectives, or I would say just non-pessimistic ones. One, and they establish a belief that things will last. And two, they kind of establish a belief that this world, in a good way, is going to be your home. Not that like the world is your home now, but that this world is going to be your home. Meaning that God is going to overcome and renew this very world that we're on. Mm-hmm. And he can and does and is, so goes the ideology, he is using the saints in his mission right now as part of that work. Yeah. And so it gives you a belief of, if I build something that's good and godly and gospel centered and gospel, proclaiming, it's not just it's not doomed to failure.
Right.
It's not just eventually going to be torn down. It could. It's not like I believe everything always gets better all the time.
Right.
But I also don't believe everything always gets worse all the time.
Right.
And those are, I think, the two extremes of eschatology that are plainly unbiblical.
Yeah, and that's what ultimately, like, lately, I've been seeing more and more, like, one of the things in my head, like, the one that came up was John Knox's statement in prayer, which has been attributed to me, quoted multiple times, saying is, "Give me Scotland or I die." That viewpoint of like, I'm going to carve out this piece of land and I'm going to work as hard as I can to glorify God in this spot where you put me. And by the way, Johnny Knox was in prison for a while through that whole thing. So just like that,
that's mindset, a baller move to say from prison, give me Scotland.
Yeah. Or I die. Like I'm in prison to preach by preaching the gospel. I could be let out, but I have to stop preaching. So I'm not getting out. Yeah. Just that mindset, I guess, that I say we're supposed to be building something for the glory of God. And we might not see the ramifications of that in our lifetime. We might not get that inch, but we're going to work hard to get that inch and the best we can and build into that.
Yeah. That's, it sort of goes,
we get the inch.
That's right. So I think that kind of leads into, in a way that leads into chapter 5 of this.
Right.
But we'll jump into chapter 4. The beginning of chapter 4, the first words are, the resurrection of the Lord Jesus was no isolated event. His return from the dead brought with it, in principle, the resurrection of all things from the dead. The power of death, which had held the entire world in thrall, was reversed at that point 2 millennia ago, and the power of his new life has since then been working through the world the way yeast works through a loaf of bread. For this reason, we are children of hope. Then he goes on to quote Romans 8. I'll just read this, and people can read on Romans 8. This starts in verse 10. If Christ be in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness. But if the spirit of him that raised up Jesus from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Christ from the dead shall also quicken your mortal bodies by his spirit that dwelleth in you. That's Romans 8, 10 through 11. Obviously a pretty famous passage. He goes on, Doug goes on. Now I'm calling him Douglas, not even meaning to. It's just like, it just feels classier to say. So he goes on to argue this point that is on the next page. And he says, so the creation longs for us to be clearly shown as sons of God. That's Romans 8, 19. The creation was subjected to vanity and hope. Verse 20. The creation will be delivered from corruption and ushered into our liberty, that's a cool concept. Verse 21. For this reason, the whole creation groans. Verse 22. And we Christians, with the first fruits of the Spirit, also groan for the resurrection, for we are saved towards something, and we wait patiently for that day of resurrection. Mm-hmm. Because we are saved towards something, we have hope, and the Spirit helps us in this groaning. That concept of being saved towards something, mm-hmm. I think it's a meaningful view of our salvation. Mm-hmm. It's easy for us to think that our salvation is a hyper individualistic thing. Like it just happens to us within our own bodies, within our own brains, mm-hmm. our own minds. We get saved, and maybe that affects what we do, but we don't think about our salvation being a part of something bigger, and we don't think about our salvation leading to something greater.
Yeah. And
that passage in Romans says over and over again that there's this cool connection between the redemption that God, like the redemption that is happening in people, in the resurrection of Christ from the dead, is not just for people, but it's also for this world that we're in. It's the beginning of the resurrection for the world. Like God isn't just resurrecting people. He's resurrecting all of creation.
Yeah, and it's almost like you don't have for so many things. I think we have the idea we've been saved from death. Mm-hmm. But the concept, I guess, of being saved toward life as individuals, as a collective, and also, I think more so should think it's like there's a lot of ramifications when they say, like, God died to build something for us to do something here while we're here, not just because we're going to get a reward in heaven for our good works, but mm-hmm. we're supposed to do something here because we're building something here. Like going back to the dominion mandate or anything, like we are saved to do things. Like we are able to rest so we can work. We're able to work so we can then rest while we work in grace. Like it's a toward, it's an advancing thing versus a retreating thing of from. Mm-hmm. Like almost if you think from versus running away from versus running towards, it's not an action as much as it's I don't want to say inaction. That's not the right word.
A reaction?
Like it's like we are actively pursuing this salvation in mm-hmm. Christ. Like we're moving forward still.
Yeah. Yeah, that goes into this perspective that he's arguing for, which is a very resurrection focused perspective, I would say. Whereas kind of like you pointed out, we're not just saved from death. I like how you said that. We're not just saved from death. We're saved for life. We're saved for resurrection. Wilson goes on to say the resurrection of the dead in Jesus started in the middle of history, mm-hmm. which is that might be, some eschatologies in some perspectives might disagree with that. I don't know how you can. This verse, like in Romans 8, coupled with 1 Corinthians 15, when it talks about Jesus being the first fruits. Mm-hmm. The first fruits, that's a farming metaphor, and the first fruits are a part of the same growing season as the last fruits. That's the point of them, is that they signal that the season has begun. You better get ready to harvest because they're becoming soon.
But also be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord.
Well, there's that. But yeah, so I think there's what that means. The fact that we're in this one reaping season is that we're in a mode of progress to that second day. You know, we're in a route of progress to the day of resurrection, not to start a new season, but to really consummate the season that's already begun.
So you have one season versus multiple seasons.
Exactly. Yeah. One resurrection of the dead. And so I love what he says here about having this perspective of being resurrection focused. We're looking to a world made new, not because we deny the present world, but rather because we understand what is currently going on in this present world. This is location 452. All this will be dismissed as pie in the sky by scoffers, but we should not be swayed by them. Those who dismiss heavenly pies are not to be trusted with earthly pies. He goes on to be talking about how this world is pregnant with that glory to be coming, which is a great way of explaining that analogy about, birth pains that's talked about. But I mean, that's the truth about the heavenly pies and earthly pies. If we're people that never believe in, if we're not concerned with the heavenly pies to come, so to speak, then we shouldn't be trusted with things that matter right now. Mm-hmm. Because the things that matter right now do have a significance. And yeah. I think that's I don't know, it kept on getting pounded into my head as I read this of, are we fueled by the resurrection? Are we fueled by the consummation? Are we fueled by a belief that resurrection is coming, not just for us individually and for the church as a whole, and also for the world that we look at every day? Like it really will be transformed and redeemed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's already begun. That's the other part of it. That's a strong thing to consider is he goes on to say that the incarnation was the beginning of the great transformation. That's how John describes it. I love that.
Yeah, I thought his I guess I like the line just being a pie. If you dismiss earthly pies, we shouldn't. Those who dismiss heavenly pies are not to be trusted with earthly pies. I just found it kind of a funny comment. Just the way it was written, which is exactly how he speaks when you hear him speak. But yeah, I think the idea of being pregnant, the relief will be great, but it will relief from the travail of this world. And also this, as you go back a few pages, he says, we're not dismissing this present reality or this present world, but I understand that what is currently going on in the present world. This is building to something. This is a current thing. And I don't know if it's this chapter or the next one where they discuss the resurrection being a private versus a public thing. Yeah. You have this moment of we understand that this is going much bigger. And throughout history, the gospel has been advanced through ways that people probably would not think it should be advanced. By how empires are built, Christianity has never been that way. Granted, yes, it was you look at the Byzantine Empire and all that stuff in the Crusades, so take that with a grain of salt. But I'm saying those people were not following the actual godly Christian path of what they would be called to do. But from the greatest expanses of true Christianity were because of sacrifice and hard work and glorifying God in the little things, and the attitude of give me Scotland or I die, or give me emphasis or I die, or Ohio or I die. Because we understand that everything we do today has an impact, not just in the world to come and the new creation, but it's also the building of that creation, the resurrection of the dead here on this earth.
Yeah, and that's what's so fundamentally meaningful about it, is that we have to stop thinking of it solely as two entirely separate worlds. The reality of the resurrection and the consummation of the kingdom is that the kingdom, that resurrection is breaking into this world.
It's an invasion here.
Yeah, it's an invasion in. It's not that at some point God just, there's like a hard cut and a hard cut where just boom, this world's done, and then just it's recreated. It's recreated just like Christ was recreated, right? He was quote unquote recreated through resurrection. It wasn't a new Christ, wasn't a new body. It was a glorified, transformed, resurrected version of what was to come, because that's what is breaking into this world. And it's this world. The very end of this chapter talks about Christ, how amazing it is that Christ, God, came here into this world. He says we need to understand the drift of this conversation. God spoke himself into our world, and he did it in order to save this world that he made. He did it to save this world that was ruined by sin. This means that was me commenting. Now it goes on with Doug. This means that we cannot spiritualize our salvation. Christ brought it here, which means that we must not try to turn it into an abstract belief. We must not be Gnostics. Christ was born into this world, into a town that is still with us, in which many of us have visited. Christ lived his life in this world. He was crucified here, and in his resurrection, he planted this new life in the middle of this dead world and promised his Father it would grow and spread. Spiritualizing it or relegating all this to heaven in some future age is a very tragic form of unbelief. Christ did not just rise from the dead and zip back to heaven. He touched people here before he left. And we must come to understand that his life is contagious. It must spread until the entire world is alive. So now the purely post-millennial portion of that is the very last sentence, until the entire world is alive. But whether you're post-millennial or all-millennial, that first chunk of that paragraph is where we should live and rejoice. Like Christ came into this world. Mm-hmm. These things happened in this world, the one that we are recording a podcast on, and he came into this world to save this world, to renew it, to redeem it, to break the curse of sin. And one day we'll get to see that, but it won't be, it's the glory of it is that he can transform and renew and resurrect this world. Not that he will simply have to cut it off one day and start over again because it gets too bad for him to handle or something.
Right.
So that's just sometimes we just need to stop and think about that, just the concreteness of our faith, the reality that it's easy to forget, because of how much time separates us maybe from the scriptures, it seems. But these things really happened in this world, that we're on. Yeah.
Well, and also if you have the fact of it says in John 5:26, this is location 491. If you're reading on Kindle, it says John 5:26, he came to give life. So that life started then of giving life. The goal isn't just for a time giving life and then ending that life or whatever. But he came to give and make new and make life happen now, not in some future only present reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. This, that chapter was one of my favorites, and chapter 5 was also one of my favorites.
Yeah. If we could wait before we go on chapter 5,
okay.
So there's a spot in the which is God, the word logos, is not the of Eastern mysticism. He's not smudged everything. He articulates it. He speaks it. Our Lord encompasses and embodies and exhibits everything that words do. Exclamations, sentences, poems, stories, parables, sermons, lectures, novels, whispers, conversations, propositions, questions, and more poetry. God speaks, and we are called to listen. I just was interesting the way he wrote it. Like, this is different than everyone else. Like, if you read through John 1, which is obviously meant to correlate or written the same manner as Genesis 1:1, like in the beginning. Like, this is also like a recreation moment of like this coming in, an invasion to recreate, bring life again, not out of the destruction necessarily old of like what we would view as destruction and judgment, but it's the invasion of the lifetime to give life to the next one. I thought it was interesting how he put all these kind of things together and jumbles them up, saying he speaks in all these things in ways that we're used to hearing him but we're just called to listen. And nothing is really lost in translation. Yeah. When he came flesh, he became one of us to speak as one of us, to give us life as our representative. So yeah, I don't know. I just found it was interesting the way it was written. It's different than everything else that we have throughout history as far as Gnosticisms. And also you have, this goes against the Gnostic reality of like, this world's only passing away. I think we can fall into that reality somewhat of like, this world is evil only and there's nothing really good in it. But that's not true either. Like, there's plenty of things like to build in, and not everything material is evil. And even as Christians, we can easily fall into that if we don't have this resurrection mindset of like, no, all things are made new. We are made new. We are made new to enjoy the gifts that God has given us. Yep. It's, I guess, just once again, the other mindset all Christians should agree on. I think in a sense we do. But do we live out that reality in the way we actually look at our lives, act around our neighbors, and actually build for the future? Just those kind of things. Yeah.
Switching into verse 5 or chapter 5. The title of this chapter is Inexorable Love. The subtitle is that the world through him might be saved, quoting John 3:17. And I loved how sort of the reading that he put on of this verse, because I never would have thought of it in this way. And I think it's a pretty faithful reading of it. I tend to read it very well connected with verse 16, meaning God didn't send Jesus here to just condemn us, but to give us an opportunity for saving. That's how I tend to read it. But kind of the way that he leans into it is God didn't send Jesus here to just judge and fail. He sent Jesus here to successfully save. And I think that this passage here, obviously we all know John 3:16, that he says the reason Christ came into the world was to save it, and most emphatically, his mission was not to try to save it. And I think that we do need to be careful, no matter what your theological persuasion might be, you do need to be careful of treating God as if he just tries to save the world, but he might not be able to. We want to be bounded by scripture, so we don't just want to base things on, kind of vague ideas. But I think that there's something pretty biblical about trying to want to stay away from that danger of thinking too small of God. And certainly it wouldn't be small of God if he so saw fit to not save this world. That wouldn't mean that he was incapable of it. It would mean that he chose not to, right? But when we have verses that talk about him trying to, talk about his purpose in doing it, it does potentially, maybe we should then consider, well, he's going to be successful at it. Yeah. God isn't going to lose. So now it just becomes a verifying that is his plan, not that he has the power to do it or the ability to do it.
Well, I guess also if we have the standpoint of if the Lord is sovereign and he does what he says he'll do, and we have times in looking throughout the Bible, throughout history of examples of him doing it, why would we think it'd be any different now after the resurrection, which quite honestly is a way bigger thing than anything else. Like, yes, like the parting the Red Sea and all the plagues are huge and amazing, but comparatively speaking, the resurrection is bigger. From every standpoint.
Yeah.
Like it just, yeah.
Just speaking of views of the atonement and what Christ did on the cross, I love this breakdown talking about what the atonement is. He says there are two popular choices, both bad. Popular evangelicalism wants the atonement to touch every last man, woman, and child, but in order to get it to do so, the touch needs to be ineffectual. On the other hand, pessimistic Calvinists want the touch to be potent and effectual for a few hundred people. But we are called to preach an effectual cross, an efficacious cross, which will manifest itself among all who hear, and all will hear, in nothing less than the salvation of the entire world. This salvation is secured by faith. For the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. Romans 4:13. And the reason I like that is because it is a rebuke of how we can misunderstand the atonement. And we shouldn't have a problem saying that salvation will reach the whole world. We shouldn't have a problem saying that because God says it's going to happen. And whenever we say that, we don't mean every person uniformly will be saved.
Right.
We mean what the old hymn says, right? That Christ came to make his blessings known as far as the curse was found.
Right.
So wherever the curse has been, Jesus's salvation and his blessings are going to flow.
Right. And that doesn't
means.
change, I guess, the efficacy of that or the effectualness of that for those that are saved now versus who will be saved later. Like the timeline of it all, as far as we do time, it doesn't change that perspective. Yes. But it does seem awfully the way it's always spoken, and I know how I said it, it does feel more pessimistic than because we basically it sounds more like you just write off the fact of even if you have this view or like I mean as we the on-mill and post-mill are very similar in many fronts. But if we believe that the Christian kingdom is advancing, and he does say that we'll cover the entire world as the floods cover the waters, there is an effectuous level that we haven't seen yet. And it will still build, and that affection will grow in a way that we can't understand right now, I guess. Like the amount of that being actually impacting people is something will grow over time, if that makes sense. Versus this one moment of history or that earlier. I don't know.
Yeah. The other things that he goes farther into the atonement. He talks about the three understandings of the atonement. There are three sort of theories of the atonement and what Christ did on the cross. And he's right to say that if we take one of these views by themselves, we start to drift toward a rejection of the actual atonement. One is, what is it? The first view is
Christ died as a substitute.
Yeah, Christ died as a substitute, which is
penal substitution.
Penal substitutionary atonement, which we would both say probably is like if this is like a 3-legged stool, this is like the most important leg somehow.
The one closer to the middle, I guess.
I guess I don't know. Like it certainly is the most fundamental. So that's just the understanding that Christ paid the price for sin on the cross. Now, the second view is, now it's important to say without that leg of the stool, you don't have the gospel.
Right.
You do not have it. You can have the other ones.
You can have the other one. You can have
the rest of the Bible.
The other ones.
You can have the rest of the Bible and those other, and you don't have the gospel.
Yeah, you don't have it. Right.
That's why it's like the most important, I would say. But it needs the other two sort of as an explanation. And so now the other view is like Christ leaves us an example when he died on his cross that we should follow in his footsteps, that we should be sacrificial like Christ is. So that's true. It just can't be the only thing that's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third view is Christ being the victor, which means that Jesus is not just paying the price, but he's also triumphing. He's winning, which is obviously biblical as well. It's just not biblical by itself.
Yeah.
And so,
well, ultimately, without the first one, you don't have this big of a reason to triumph, I guess, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
I mean, you do and you don't. It's just there's more to the triumph than just that aspect.
Part of the victory is the salvation, is the paying of debt, So then Paul in Colossians 2 talks here in Colossians 2:3. This is a pretty fundamental passage. So he says, "And you being dead in your sins and the uncircumcision of your flesh, hath he quickened together with him, having forgiven all your trespasses, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it." But in that verse, you have Jesus functioning as a prophet, showing us the way to go. He has Jesus as a priest making the payment for sin, and we have him as a king triumphing over enemies. So he goes on to say, Doug, this brings us to the question of the new humanity and the old princes. There will be more on this in the next chapter, which we'll talk about to come. But we have to touch on it now. Jesus was not murdered in private by thugs, only to come back from the dead in secret, with a select band of followers being told to whisper the news to another handful. No, he was executed publicly by the authorities, and he rose from the dead in such a way as to declare his absolute authority over all the kingdoms of men and over everything that they contain. We have to learn how to see the cross in these terms, which is what Paul is insisting in our text. When we preach Christ crucified, Doug goes on to say this, we are preaching the hope and glory of the world, and what God has prepared for us who love him here on this earth has not begun to enter the heart of man. What is God preparing to pour over this whole planet? What is he planning to give us? What is his saving intent for the world? He is going to inundate our sorry and sinful world with the deep things of God. When the earth is finally as full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea, those seas will be infinitely deep. In thinking about the greatness of the Great Commission, you do not have to worry about overdoing it. And so he says the crucifixion is power because it is not just Jesus doing something in secret, but it's actually Jesus conquering and Jesus winning, Jesus overcoming the authorities, the rulers, the principalities of this world. And so he goes on to talk about righteousness and how Jesus judges the world in righteousness, which is an interesting concept. But the one thing I want to focus on for really quick about this public victory that Jesus had is that goes to say that he does have a claim on the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
He has a claim on the world right now. Jesus is judging the world in righteousness. What that means, this is a phrase that I never really understood in scripture whenever Jesus talks about judging the world in righteousness. And Wilson explains it as saying that he judges the world in righteousness by showing us what actual righteousness looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So without Christ, we have no standard. We have no actual righteousness. We make it up. Men have their little man-sized kingdoms and they try to do things their own way. Jesus having actual righteousness and giving us that standard in his word and also validating it by victory in the cross shows us what real righteousness looks like, which means we ought to live today as though that real righteousness has been revealed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's where it crosses into so many of the questions we have today about what is just and unjust. That's where it does crowd into our politics at times, or it ought to. Because Jesus didn't merely save us individually. He also is establishing the new justice, the new order of the world that he made.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes to the Great Commission. I mean, he says we are to teach and baptize the nations. We're to disciple the nations about how to obey everything that he commanded us to obey. And so that leads to this understanding that we should not just preach the gospel as a gospel of the cross, but it's also a gospel of the kingdom that has come through the cross and the kingdom that is coming through the cross. And that just, I think that goes back kind of full circle to the belief of the resurrection that we talked about earlier. That it's a difference if it's only a gospel of the cross, you are sort of preaching a gospel that only looks back, but we're saved towards something.
Right.
And we've been given a gospel, a good news of a kingdom coming, not only a cross that has already been done.
Yes.
So,
well, I just like the idea that if you read through that chapter, you sit there and say, like, there's no really overdoing it. Why is there no overdoing it? It's because it's already the biggest thing. So you can't overdo anything. Nothing we do on this side of heaven can ever be bigger than that, I guess.
Yeah.
Or that, like he talked about, like, we must declare the ramifications of this stupendous fact that, like, this is a public thing. And so with his public resurrection, he's saying, all this is mine again. I'm the representative, I'm the federal head, and now I'm taking back what is rightfully mine.
mm-hmm.
What sin has marred is not marred anymore. And that's what we're called to build and declare as reigning now.
Yeah. Yeah, he one of the last quotes in this chapter that I think is so cool. He says, the death of Jesus was an act of love, as all evangelicals confess. We all agree about that. But he says we must come to a larger view. It was an act of love for the entire world and everything it contains, not just an act of love for a select few. That's where it goes back to what was the atonement doing? Was it just for a few people, or was it for the whole world? And it was salvific for the people it was salvific for, but it was also for the whole world in that it redeemed the whole world. So this final paragraph, he says, he came to make his blessings flow far as the curse is found, and that is pretty far, in our legislative halls, in our courts, in our streets. Jesus, the crucified one, did not come in order to judge the world, but that the world might be saved.
Mm-hmm.
And if we believe that this world is ultimately sort of meaningless to God and it's just going to be replaced, then it is easy to sort of lose track of God's influence over the world that we live in today. We just go about our business and we just keep rolling along. But if we believe that God cares about this world and is working his mission in this world, then we believe that we can take ground and fight for truth and love and justice and life in the world around us. And we can believe that it's going to work, and we can believe that it matters to God. So,
right. Yeah. And I think that's something he mentions. I think just with everything, as far as the political climate goes lately, I've been more so praying for the fact of, like, and I'm reading through, like, so that stanza 3 of Joy to the World by Isaac Watts, like, no more let sins and sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow far as the curse is found.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. And, like, we sing this song at Christmas, but we don't think about it from the rest of the world. Like, this is the promise of redemption. This is what the public ramifications of his public resurrection hold. And that's just not for our own private, precious lives, our private, precious Christian faith, but that private faith should then go out and impact your communities, your jobs, your relationships, your neighbors, and our courts and our legislative halls. When the way we pray for our leaders and the way we vote for our leaders and the way we speak to everyone around us, everything must come back to the fact of we are called to advance this.
Yeah.
great, stupendous fact that the Lord reigns and that wherever the curse is found on earth, it will be gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good place to end it because we were going to go quick and man, we must have been rusty, but we must have had plenty to say, I think.
Yeah. I just looked at the clock. This has almost been like almost a full hour. We haven't done a full hour app in a long time.
Oh my goodness.
People were probably tuned out.
I just want to say, like, again, disclaimer, you can be non-post-millennial, you can be dispensational and still have optimism, and you can still care about justice, you can still care about the world. But
yes,
I think it's a fair critique to consider respectfully, and I do say this respectfully, consider if your beliefs accord with caring about those things, right? Like, do your theological foundations line up with the belief that God can and does and should exert influence over this world? Yeah. That it can and should and does exert influence over how we live, what we're called to do, what standards we should apply to the world that we live in right now. Mm-hmm. So, and that's a thing that we ought to consider as Christians. But that verse from Isaac Watts is one of my favorites for a good reason, because it is pretty cool that he comes to make his blessings flow far as the curse is found. So this has been chapter 4 and 5. Chapter 6 and 7, maybe that'll be a full hour too. I don't know.
Who knows? We'll see. We're not recording that right now, so
we're not. No, we got to hit the hay and everything. So
yeah,
you got any recommendations?
I did have one. I actually was thinking about what it was. I can't remember what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. We've been trying to get back to. It's been make sure. I guess my recommendation is teach your kids to pray, and like that's something right now. So we have Micah's too, and he obviously doesn't understand everything. But having him say, "Dad, we have to pray," or like, I want to sing "Jesus Loves Me." Great, and I also know that is him sort of trying to milk bedtime a little bit. Yeah. But I'm like, well, I'm gonna if this is what we're gonna milk, I guess we'll milk this one for all it's worth right now.
Yeah, this one's fine. Yeah.
And that I think goes into what we're talking about too, is the fact of building in the next generation, to the fact of the things that are important, the consistency of prayer and singing songs of joy of what Christ has done for us and his love for us. And that's the small things we can do. I think on a daily basis, just sitting there, okay, we're going to pray now, turn the TV off, or after we're done reading a book, and just take the time to do those things.
Yeah, that's good. Very good. Well, and I just piggybacking on that, pray. Don't be afraid to pray consistently for big things. That's one thing that this book and other sort of books in the vein teach me to do, is like, you can pray for your country and you can believe that it matters. And at the same time, you can pray. Just a reminder that I've had for myself in sort of the season that I've been in, that I've been left very tired, just kind of emotionally worn out, is you can also pray. Just never forget that when you're praying to your Father. You're praying to a good Father, and you can be honest, and you can ask God to bear your cares, and He does. Yeah. So there you go. Pray. It's useful.
Just
fill that quiver. So
fill that quiver up. Man, I feel like that's like a post-milk cross politic ending right there.
Yeah,
fill that quiver. I'm surprised that hasn't been said.
Well, what we'll say instead is that we've done what we've always do, which is talk for an hour about 2 chapters of one book.
Yeah, and a few other things.
I think we did all right. And until next time, we'll see you guys next time.
How are we signing off? I guess is the real question.
And until next time, we'll stop talking. I love that.
So we stop.
Yeah. We should just maybe not say until next time. We should just
stop mid-sentence. Like, you should start talking and then just end it mid-sentence. And then people leave them wanting more.
I think we've done all right. There's the last words right there.
Where we can build something for the next generations, if you will.
That's right.
Boom.
I see what you did there.
You see what I did there? That's actually something, honestly, going through this whole thing and getting more into the whole thing, like...
Hold on to it. Hold on to it.
It's called a teaser in the radio world.